and the like, and women, children, LGBT people fleeing violence. And understand, ladies and gentlemen, a refugee does not come to our country surreptitiously. They voluntarily, they walk to the door and say that they're having problems, they're being at risk, their lives are in danger and the like. They're not illegal immigrants and those kinds of things. So understand the distinction between what is a illegal immigrant and what is a refugee, parolee, or asylee. Those people are coming voluntarily. 1100% increase in asylum applications between 2011 and 2017, about 294,000 asylum seekers. But we've had a zero tolerance policy. These people were separating children from their parents and the like. This is doing irreparable damage, ladies and gentlemen, to a cadre, a population. The next year, in 2020, our ceiling on refugees is 18,000 people. That's the maximum that we're allowing to enter our country moving forward. So understand all of this is in the middle. Now, there is this thing called illegal immigration, which wasn't much of a problem in America prior to 1965 for two reasons: the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. You ever met anybody try to swim either one of those bodies and arrive to tell you about it? It just wasn't a problem. But after 1965, we have this profound shift in geographic origins of immigrants and a southern border that has been relatively fluid, this thing called illegal immigration has assumed greater importance. How important? 300,000 to 400,000 people annually over the last couple of decades. This debate about illegal immigration is not new as we hear it today. It's been around when I was on the faculty at UCLA in California in the 80s and the 90s. Lots of discussions at that time about we got too many illegal immigrants in America. We need to do something to stem the tide. At that time, the federal government said, well, maybe if we saturate labor demand, if we fill every job in our economy, there'll be no reason for anybody to enter our country illegally because there won't be any work for them to do. How do we propose to fill every job in our economy? Via something called the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. We said to any illegal immigrant in America, if you've been here illegally, you can document that you've been here illegally, we will grant you amnesty, no questions asked. Well, how do you document that you've been here illegally since before 1982? Well, if you got a rent receipt, a clothing bill, a greasy receipt from Burger King said I bought a Whopper before 1982, we granted you amnesty. How many people came forward to accept the federal government's offer of amnesty? About 3 million people came forward to accept amnesty, all contributing to the growing diversity of our population. Understand the numbers and the impact of the legislation was actually bigger than that, though. Why? Because when you accept amnesty, you are then, via the immigration law, entitled to bring family members via the family provision, so the numbers were actually bigger than that. But what we know is that there were about 2.7 million people here illegally or through unauthorized channels that didn't come forth to accept the amnesty. They didn't trust the federal government enough to say, not going for the okie-doke, you're not going to identify me and deport me. And they didn't go home, they stayed. So by about 1996, we estimated that there were about 5 million illegal immigrants in the country. And if you follow the debate since 2005, between 2005 and about 2015, 2016, that number has ranged wildly between about 7 million and about 15 million people supposedly that are unauthorized. What I can tell you is that over the last several years, I've probably averaged 3 to 5 calls a week from the media asking me how many illegal immigrants there are in America. And you want to be respectful and you want people to respect your numbers. So you stay up all night figuring and blaze a path to the restroom, get all nervous and carried on. You get on an airplane, first thing you do is ask the attendant for a napkin so you can figure so your numbers can be as valid as possible. And then I discovered that the only person getting old and gray in this process was me. So whenever they call me now and ask me how many illegal immigrants in America, I just say a lot. The real number, ladies and gentlemen, is about 11 million people. Now, when you hear the debate about unauthorized illegal immigrants, what group becomes the poster child for illegal immigration in America? Who are we talking about? Who are we talking about? Typically some person of Mexican descent surreptitiously crossing the Rio Grande, right? I want to suggest to you it's a little bit more complicated than that. But to get you to understand the complication, I got to confuse you a little bit. But it's not me confusing you, it's the way the numbers are gathered. Are you aware that there are a group of immigrants in America called non-immigrants? You're aware that there are a group of immigrants in America called non-immigrants. They say, what is he drinking? Non-immigrants are people we invite to America on a temporary basis. There are about 68 different categories of these folks. Tourists, foreign diplomats, international students, and international baseball players, all enter America on temporary visas. Ladies and gentlemen, if you enter America on a 90-day tourist visa and you stay 91 days, what are you? No, you're called a visa overstayer. Ladies and gentlemen, 40 to 45% of the illegal immigrants in America walk through the door with papers from the federal government. When it's time to go home, what do? They stay. Remember the terrorists of 9/11? 6 of them were here with tourist visas that hadn't expired. 3 or 4 of them fit the visa overstayer category. When it's time to go home, they just blew us off. Another 6, we don't know how the heck they got here. And the last one came on a student visa, was supposed to go to California to learn to read and speak English, but instead went to flight school in Florida. And we now know after the fact the flight school was a bit dubious of this guy because of his poor facility of English. So they reported him to the Immigration Service, Federal Aviation Administration. Anybody that would listen, you got this guy who wants to be a pilot, but he can't read and speak English very well. The guy could speak English well enough to tell the flight school he had no interest in learning how to land planes, only to fly them. Why don't you hear much about this population, ladies and gentlemen? Well, it's big business for us, number one. Look, the numbers grew from about 11.7 million in 1981 to right before 9/11 in 2001, about 32.8 million people entering on temporary visas and the like. International tourists spend about $3,000 to $5,000 per visit. International students contribute $12.8 billion to our economy annually. Why? They pay 10 to 15% in excess of out-of-state tuition, and they have to pay the full freight of the cost of living while they're here because they're not allowed to work. And please don't tell me that an international baseball player is a low-wage worker. It's all about big business. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're worried about illegal immigration, it's probably not the poor Mexican immigrant that wants to come work hard, take care of their families, raise their children, send money home, and the like. It's probably these folks. You know why? They come from all over the world. Please don't be offended by what I'm about to say, but they look a lot like y'all. In fact, I don't know who's illegal in here. I'm going to find out before I leave. And they could be sitting beside you in some of the most sensitive areas of the economy and you not know it. This population is like finding a needle in a haystack. I didn't say 10%, I didn't say 20%, I said 40 to 45% of the unauthorized immigrants in America walk through the door with papers from the federal government. So understand that dynamic as we have this discussion about unauthorized immigration. My more general statement, immigrants are playing a greater role in our society. We kept it low into the mid-1960s. You see that huge takeoff to there's about 43 million people who are foreign-born today in our population. Who are they? Yes, about 46% of them are Hispanic or the Latinx population. You'll note that the second most largest share is the Asian population. Note that the non-Hispanic white share of the foreign-born population was at about 18%. If you looked at these numbers prior to 1965, they would have been what? Flipped. They would have been reversed because we had that preference for people from European society. When we talk about the browning of America, we're talking about the source of growth and where it is coming from in our population. Now, the reason I asked you about your 2010 census form is because it asked you to self-identify. It asked you the one question, are you Hispanic? And if you say, yeah, you check that box. And if you said, well, I'm not Hispanic, you had to check the non-Hispanic box. And that was kind of like another question, well, what the heck are you? Are you non-Hispanic white? Are you non-Hispanic black, American Indian, Alaska Native, Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, or are you a mixed race person? 2010, we added 27 million people to our population in this country. You will note that 15.2 million of the 27 million were Hispanic. You'll note that the non-Hispanic population, right above the top yellow line, increased at 12.2 million, but the number I want to draw your attention to is the growth in the non-Hispanic white population. It grew by 2.3 million, or 1.2%. During the first decade of the new millennium. Ladies and gentlemen, between those two yellow lines and inclusive of the bottom yellow line, those are all people of color, and you will note double-digit growth in everybody except the American Indian, Alaska Native population. It's at 9%. It's close enough. When I'm talking about the browning of America, I'm talking about the source of your growth in the population and how it will move forward and change the complexion of our society moving forward. Bring it all the way to 2017, 2010 to 2017, the U.S. population grew by 5.6% during that period. You will note that the non-Hispanic white population grew by 0.4%. Everybody to the right of the purple, those are people of color, ladies and gentlemen. You see that double-digit growth. That's what's going to drive change. That's changing the composition of our population in this country, and much of it is immigrant-driven in terms of the browning of America as we know it. What share of growth was due to browning? That 17 million people we added, 91% of it was non-white. What does that mean? Everybody but non-Hispanic white population. That's the browning of America. About 50% of it was Hispanic. Here in the South, it was 82% and 42% respectively. Here in North Carolina, 66% of growth was non-white and about 23% was Hispanic, because we are a new Hispanic magnet in terms of the trajectory of change that we're talking about here of growth. This is so important to our future, ladies and gentlemen, because what you have to understand is that immigration and migration are age-selective processes. What does that mean? It means far more young people migrate and immigrate than old people. Doesn't mean old people don't move. They move slower and at a lower propensity than young folk. There's one more piece to this story. Please don't repeat this anywhere, because you could lose your seat in this august body. In fact, I'm denying I say this before I say it. But young people are more likely to have children than old folks. When you put those two things together, age selectivity of people coming in and higher fertility, it has an impact on the age structure in your community. Look at it. So if you looked at 2017, the median age of the U.S. population was 38. Half of us older than that, half of us younger than that. What's the median age of a Hispanic in America? Last row, second column. 29 years old. How many of you have heard that Hispanics are a burden on the healthcare system in America? What kind of major health problems do you have when your median age is 29? Before you answer that, what's the median age of a white non-Hispanic in America up there? 44 years old, 43. Ladies and gentlemen, when you're in your 20s, to the extent that you have health problems, they are usually acute, right? You stuck your finger in a lawnmower, you got to go get it glued back on. When you move from your 20s to your 40s, your health conditions move from acute to what? Chronic. Which one costs the most? Chronic. Trust me, I know. I lost my wife to cancer at 48 years old. Her treatment in the last 6 months of life, $5,000 a week. Just lost a dear friend in his 60s to a rare form of cancer. His treatment is $17,000 a week. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of what you hear makes no sense. These are young people that we're going to need to propel our nation moving forward because of the dynamic that we're talking about here. And I know people say, well, they have a whole lot of children. Ladies and gentlemen, you need a lot of children before you get to one cancer treatment. And when is the cost to the healthcare system greatest? It's in the final months and days of life. It's not, this stuff makes no sense. There's one more piece to the story. This is for the ladies in the room. Ladies, you can tell the guys to close their ears, but I think they need to hear this. Ladies, there's something in demography called completed fertility, okay? I won't give you the big theory today. I'll come to Chapel Hill, give us a little cash. We'll tell you early and often. Completed fertility, ladies, is when you tell your husband or your boo, go take out the trash, ain't nothing else happening here, okay? And completed fertility for women occurs between the ages of 40 and 44. There's this precipitous drop in fertility between the ages of 40 and 44. What's the median age? Far right column, yellow line. What's the median age of a non-Hispanic white female in America? 45 years old. Bottom far right line, what's the median age of a Hispanic female? 30 years old. Now, between those two lines, those two yellow lines, all of those are women of color. And you will note a 10 to 20 year gap in the median age of those women of color compared to white females. They are 10 to 20 years younger. Do you know what that gap is? That's your fertility gap. We know exactly where kids are going to come from. Now, there may be some of y'all in your 40s tomorrow, I'm going home and fix this tonight. With the permission of your esteemed board here, I'd say leave now. Every stoplight between here and home, let it cycle through 3 or 4 times, do all the action you can do, get all the rest you can get. You might go home and squeeze out one, but you're not going to do what a 29-year-old can do. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a competitiveness issue for us. Not unique to the United States. We are an aging nation, as you will see. If you build a wall around your country, push everybody out, you got a slight problem. It's called the future competitiveness of our nation, and some of you won't have a job because where are the kids going to come from? Right here. It's biology, it's not sociology. Look at North Carolina, they're even younger. The Hispanic population is 25 years old here. 25. That's a competitiveness issue, and you got to frame it that way when you get down to the mouth. We've seen the impact in births. In 1990, 66% of all births in America to non-Hispanic white families. That dropped to about 50% in 2008. For the first time in history, in 2011, non-Hispanic white births dropped below 50%. It's not likely to go the other way. When we talk about the browning of America, we're talking about where the source of growth is going to come from moving forward. And we're talking about a heck of a color adjustment. 67% of the population was non-Hispanic white in 2005. 10 years earlier, it was about 74%. We now think by 2050, it's going to be around 47% growth among Hispanics, growth among Asians. That's what's driving the browning of America as we know it today. Further complicating, further transforming, if you will, the composition of our population is a fundamental shift at the same time in marriage patterns. Marrying out is in is about the growing out marriage rate, which means that you marry someone of a different racial or ethnic group than you belong to. As all of you know, it was even illegal for blacks and whites to marry in this country until the mid-1960s. That all changed, but I'm not talking about black-white marriage. I'm talking about a more profound shift in marriage. Among newlyweds, the intermarriage or out-marriage rate went from about 3% in 1967 to about 17% in 2015. A little later in terms of data that we have, from about 3% in the late 70s to about 10% among all married people, this profound change in marriage. Who's doing all this hooking up in strange ways? Well, about 42% of those marriages are between Hispanics and whites. About 15% of them are between Asians and whites. In about 14% of the cases, both marriage partners are non-white, black and Asian, Asian and Hispanic. And note that black-white relationships are the smallest share at about 11%. There's this other group, I don't know who the heck they are, at about 18%, but they're having fun and they're hooking up. What does this mean? The kids that walk into the school door moving forward won't fit into the nice and neat little crucibles we're accustomed to putting them in, and they won't allow you to put them in those clusters. This growing intermarriage, and this is further transforming the complexion of our society, and what it means is that whose history do we teach? What are curricular implications of a more diverse population? Now, it also means you got to be careful how you portray family life in your advertising and marketing. This is probably one place where corporations are much further along than you all are, than we are in education. Goes back to several years ago. You remember the Cheerios commercial at the Super Bowl? Classic. African-American male lying on a couch asleep. Little girl, his daughter, rushes up to him and dumps Cheerios on his chest. And it's clear that this little girl is a mixed-race child. And then the camera shifts from the child to the mother, and the mother's what? Non-Hispanic white. Oh, Twitter went crazy. How dare you at the Super Bowl air your dirty laundry about all this? But I do like Cheerios. They're heart healthy. I mean, it went berserk. But the company wasn't that bothered by it. In fact, so much so, at the Super Bowl the following year, they had another commercial with the same family. Woman pregnant again. What they're saying, get over it. This is America, and you just need to figure out how, because if you put people in a room, somebody gonna hook up sooner or later. That's what this is all about, and it says that we gotta rethink everything in the way we serve our population, because this browning thing is both two things. It's immigration driven, it's about intermarriage patterns and a whole range of things there. All of this is important because at the same time that immigration and intermarriage is transforming the complexion of our society, browning our population, if you will, we are also experiencing the graying of America at the same time. And the graying of America is different from the browning. Browning is immigration driven. The graying of America is about the aging of our native-born population, and in particular, our native-born non-Hispanic white population. Let's just get this out of the way because I know it's on your mind. How do you know if you're part of the graying of America? There are 4 ways. Number 1, if you have difficulty seeing this screen, you're it. Number 2, if you've got to go to the restroom 3 times during this presentation, you're it. And number 3, if you fall asleep, you're just a old codger. It ain't my fault. You're part of the graying of America. Graying of America is about 3 things. It's about changes in longevity. It's about declining fertility. And it's about a group of us born between 1946 and 1964. We're called the boomer generation. Ladies and gentlemen, we're living much longer today than we ever envisioned in our history. When we introduced Social Security in America in 1935, the average person turning 65 was going to live another 12.7 years. That same person turning 65 today is going to live another 18.7 years to about age 83. And we now think living to 100 on a routine basis is well within reach. There's one school of thought that says a person who lived to 130 has already been born. Why? Well, we got major medical advances that are doing what? Extending our lives. You all are eating better some of the time. You all are exercising some of the time. All of that adds years to your life. And now we got this thing called regenerative medicine. We have a scientist, as you know, here in North Carolina that has regenerated a bladder. So your bladder wear out, we'll sell you another one. You just tell me what color you want. We're working on every body part around the world. There are these longevity hotspots where people live forever. So now we're talking about a longevity economy because of this extended lifespan of people that you see here in all of this. We think there'll be well over 600,000 centenarians in the country by 2050. There's some new numbers out that extend that number to 750,000 to 1 million people that are 100 or older that is contributing to this longevity, if you will, longevity economy that we need to be mindful of. And part of it has to do with, this longevity economy, has to do with changing fertility behavior of women. To understand how those fertility rates have changed, you have to look at those women 40 to 44 and through a 30-year lens. So look here, if you looked at women 40 to 44 in 1976, only about 10% of them were childless. They didn't have any children whatsoever. Fast forward 30 years to 2006, the percentage of women 40 to 44 who had no children increased from 10% of our women to what? 20% of our women. They're not adding anything at the lower end of the lifespan, and when you don't add at the lower end, what happens to the upper end? It gets older as a function of that. In 1976, the average woman 40 to 44 had 3.1 kids. That's above replacement level. If you are a couple, you have to have 2.1 kids to replace yourself, okay? Don't ask me about the 0.1. You just got to be rocking and rolling when you do it, okay? That was above replacement level. You fast forward to 2006, the average woman who had children at 40 to 44 had 1.9 kids. That's below replacement level. 59% of women in 1976 had 3 or more kids, higher order births. It dropped down to 28%. What's going on? Well, this room is a powerful statement. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies, what happens when you all become educated, upwardly mobile, career-oriented? What happens to the age of marriage? Typically goes up, right? If the age of marriage goes up, what happens to the age of first childbirth? Typically goes up. As those 2 things go up, you're doing what? You're depressing the number of years it is safe to have children. That depresses fertility and has an impact on the age structure in your community moving forward. It takes 2.1 kids to replace yourself, ladies and gentlemen. If it takes 2.1 kids to grow, who's replacing themselves in America? You got one group, folks. You got one group. Non-Hispanic whites have had a total fertility rate between 1.7 and 1.9 for 2 decades, okay? I'm a bit confused about this 0.7 or 0.9 of a kid. I taught a few of them at Chapel Hill, but it takes 2.1 kids to replace yourself. Connect the dots, ladies and gentlemen. If you have below replacement level fertility, you're an aging population. Where are you going to get talent moving forward in all of this? And group of us born between 1946 and 1964. Let me see a show of hands. 1946 to 1964. Some of y'all refuse to put your hands up line, but it's all right. Those of us who have our hands up, 1946 to 1964, are products of the post-World War II hormonal rush in America. It was our fathers who went off to World War II and came back home and got busy to the tune of producing 81 million of us. We're the boomer generation. On January 1st of 2011, the first baby boomer born in America turned 65 and became eligible for what? Everything. Every day, ladies and gentlemen, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, from 2011 to 2029, we boomers are turning 65 at the rate of 10,000 per day. That's every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, from 2011 to 2029. Look at us. In 2010, we were 45 to 64. There were 81 million of us, 32% increase in that population. You'll note that the second most rapidly growing population was the 65-plus population. Why? That average person turning 65 is going to live another 18.7 years. That's the longevity economy right there. Aging out, you got this pig in the python aging out, and you got us 65-year-olds and olders. We don't die, we just multiply. That's what aging is all about here. Now, do you understand when someone tells you that Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system, do you know what that means? It means that we are paying in right now, but somebody else is spending our money. Now, for you folk that are younger, what do y'all need to be doing so that I get money out of the system? Y'all need to be working every day, 4 jobs with benefits. But you got a slight problem. What happened to the 25 to 44-year-old population? It actually declined. Why would the 25 to 44-year-old population decline? Well, we had a baby bust, right? Stop having children in sufficient numbers to replace ourselves. But the thing that most people don't know and don't recognize is some of the debilitating diseases that beset us boomers and pre-boomers later in life are now besetting Gen X and Gen Y earlier in life, leading to the early onset of death and disability. The suicide rate, the alcohol-related death, the drug-related death rate is so high among that population that it is affecting the life expectancy at birth. That was the opioid crisis in 1999. That's it in 2014. 11,000 people hospitalized daily and well over 100 deaths every day, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the people that we need to be doing what? Working, paying into the system, taking care of their kids and all of that, but they are doing what? Being decimated. Connect the dots, ladies and gentlemen, between aging on the one hand and the dynamics that are occurring in this population. You cannot have a sustainable system when you're losing that many people in your society, and at the same time erecting barriers to people coming in. If you can't reproduce it, you got to import it. We got a slight problem in our society today with all of this. But I don't want you to think us old fuddy-duddies are all obsessing over memory loss and incontinence and the like. We're not. We're one mobile bunch of people, right? Where are we headed? Everybody's headed south. We know exactly where they're going. Mountains, water, golf courses, any amenity-rich area, they're there. They're there. They're there. What that means is that there are some places, though, in the country that young people are leaving behind an older adult population. They have a dependency problem. Those green counties on this map and the purple ones, they don't have enough young people to take care of the old folks. That's called the old age dependency problem. Loneliness, isolation, real problems there. And loneliness and isolation for an older adult is equivalent to smoking about 14 cigarettes a day. That's a problem. That's a problem. You got to connect the dots to these things in terms of change. Where are the elderly in North Carolina? If we look at them in absolute numbers, they don't look any different from the total population. But if you look at them in terms of percent of elderly, you begin to see those amenity-rich coastal communities and the mountains and on the coast there. Anybody know what those 2 counties in the red center there are? Chatham and Moore. Chatham and Moore. Many of the rich kinds of communities, we know exactly where they are, all transforming populations. Those are the old age dependency. I'm not worried about the red counties. I'm worried about the orange counties, because the red counties, you got a bunch of people moving in there who have a lot of cash, a lot of dough that come from all over the country. I'm worried about those orange places because the old age dependency ratio is high enough that there are not enough young people to take care of the old people. They can't pay their bills in those places, and you need to be mindful that if you got school systems and the like in those kind of places, you got a challenge in terms of the ability to pay. This aging thing strikes home for you in a different way. For the first time in history, we have 4 generations in the workplace, and next year it will be 5. Everybody from the pre-boomer, born in 1945 or earlier, who's most familiar and loved with a rotary dial phone, to you millennials who waltz into work at 10:30 in the morning with 2 buds in the ear whistling, and all us boomers who arrive at 5:30 in the morning, because that's the way we roll. And the boomer looks at the millennial and says, look at that, that's a bad work ethic come rolling up in here at 10:30 in the morning. And the millennial takes the 2 buds out long enough to say to the boomer, you can't spell work ethic because I finished walking in the door what you've been navigating at since 5:30 this morning. And old Mr. Pre-Boomer's still trying to get the first rotary dial call out for the day, and it's 10:30. And then there's you with an HR system that is a one-size-fits-all, costing you about $40 million a year in lost work productivity, because across those generations, there are different values, different orientations, different familiarities with technology, and a whole range of things that is totally disruptive in terms of the kinds of changes that we find ourselves in. So still lots of people across those generations in the workplace, but we have HR systems that isn't aligned with that reality. 2 things: succession planning. You know, those of us who are a little gray on the mountaintop, sooner or later, we got to go. Some of you all know down to the minute when you're going to leave. Others, you got to rent a bulldozer to pull your butt out of here, but you got to go. That's called succession. The question becomes, as we age out, 2 things. How do you think about recruiting the next cadre of talent, fully understanding that it can't look like us, got to be far more diverse because your market is far more diverse. And then, all of you are pretty smart people, been around the block a time or 2. What's going to happen to all the knowledge you've accumulated when you leave? Well, if you haven't forgotten it all, it's going to what? Go with you. The real challenge is how do you engage in what is called knowledge succession, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel all over again. Most HR systems, they don't even have it on the radar, but this is a huge thing. This sounds strange because you're a school system, but hear me out. Child care won't be the big issue moving forward for your organization. Why? Fertility rates are way down. What will it be? It'll be elder care. And elder care, ladies and gentlemen, is radically different from child care, isn't it? Child care is actually pretty predictable. You drop your crumb snatch off at the daycare in the morning, you go pick them up at 5:30 in the afternoon. You may have to go at lunchtime if they do something they got no business, but that's pretty predictable. Elder care, on the other hand, and in particular if you have a loved one with Alzheimer's or dementia, that's a totally different ballgame. You're going to have to figure out how to squeeze work in if you take seriously your elder care responsibilities. And what you need to understand, ladies and gentlemen, it's not just us old fuddy-duddies who have elder care responsibilities. 10 million millennials in America have elder care responsibilities. And I'm sure you're asking, how could a millennial have elder care responsibilities? I'm glad you asked. Assume for the moment, I'm 55 years old, you know I'm much older than that. Assume, secondly, that in my 55th year, I went through a midlife crisis. I didn't. And assume in my 55th year, my midlife crisis, I married a 30-year-old. Heaven forbid. And assume in my 55th year, my midlife crisis, me and my 30-year-old have a child. How old am I when that kid turns 20? Trust me, it's 75. Old enough for the kid to look at you and say, what the heck were you thinking? All of a sudden, that kid has what? Elder care responsibility. What does that mean for you? You don't know who in your organizations have elder care responsibilities, because it's not something that's what? Obvious. Ladies and gentlemen, for a decade that ended last November, I have 3 siblings. We had 10 family members between the ages of 87 and 99 that we were responsible for taking care of. Some days I was afraid to pick up the phone. Not because I didn't want to talk to my loved ones, but rather because when you do pick up the phone, they typically lie through their teeth. Not because they're outright liars, but rather because they're very proud people. They don't want to tell you the truth about anything, but everything is falling apart in their lives, and they all sunshine, all of this kind of stuff. This is a major problem in organizations today, and people don't want to talk about it for fear of what? Reprisal. Because we got HR systems that don't even accommodate elder care. Only about 20 or 30% of corporations have any accommodation for elder care, and this is one of the huge issues, and I would invite you to think about it because you need to understand it. Cooling water from grandma's well and grandpa's too is partly related to this, but I'll get to it in just a moment. This is about one of the most rapidly growing household types of the first decade of new millennium. Now, if you look at the under 18 population and their living arrangements, there's actually been a decline in children, and there are really three kind of households out there that we look at. There are households where husband and wife are present with their kids, no grandparents are present. And then there are two kinds of grandparent households. There are households where grandparents are living with their grandchildren, but they're not responsible for raising their grandchildren. And then there's a set of households where the grandparents are responsible for raising their grandchildren. Where's the growth? Where's the growth? It's in these grandparent households where grandma only and grandfather only are responsible for raising grandchildren. And ladies and gentlemen, the numbers are pretty stunning. If you're in one of those red states up here, greater than 50% of grandparents are responsible for raising their grandchildren. Here in North Carolina, it's between about 30 and 39% of grandparents are responsible for raising their grandchildren. Now, what's interesting about this, ladies and gentlemen, 60% of those grandparents are between the ages of 30 and 59. What does that mean? Don't look all cross-eyed when a 31-year-old fellow employee walks up to you and say, I need time off to go check on my what? Grandchild. It'll be real. It'll be real. 30 to 59. Only about 40% of grandparents today fit the stereotypical image of a grandparent. Okay? Only about 40%. And about 42% of those grandparents have been taking care of their grandchildren for 5 years or longer. Ladies and gentlemen, opioid crisis will do this to you. Those crises, age-related deaths I talked about of young people earlier, will do this to you. How many of you know what your school system looks like when it comes to these kinds of numbers? How many of you know that? Now, there's some old grandparents there. How do you know about the adultification of childhood, where the kid that walks in the school door is actually responsible for taking care of the older adult in the household and fearful that grandmama's going to die? We don't have any tools for that. We don't have any tools for that. Couple of challenges. The end of men, then the triple whammy. Good news first. They say, well, I need some. Come on, what's wrong with this thing? Women are about to surpass men as the numerical majority in the paid workforce in America. In 2010, women constituted 49.8% of all paid workers. The operative term is paid. Women have been working all their lives, paid workers. And among educated women, it's even much higher in terms of women. But ladies, reality is not because we've decided to treat you all fairly. There's still a huge gender wage gap out there, right? 80, 81 cents on the dollar and the like. Rather, this reality is because men are doing so poorly in American society today. Look at it. Today, 3 times as many men of working age do not work at all compared to 1969. Why don't they work? They don't have the skills to compete in the global economy. They're disabled, or they're what? Incarcerated. Disability rate doubled between 1970 and 2009. Median wage of the American male dropped by $13,000 after accounting for inflation. Most telling for us After peaking in 1977, male college completion rates have barely changed in the last 35 years. The sex ratio in higher education has been 60% female, 40% male for a decade. I assure you at birth, the sex ratio is not 60-40. It's more like what? 50-50. Where are the boys? Where are the men? In 2010, we granted 572,000 more degrees to women than we did men in the higher education system. Hannah Rosen's book about the end of men is about this sex ratio imbalance. So ladies, the good news is y'all are educated, employed, looking good. The bad news is if you ain't hitched, forget about it. Ain't enough eligible, marriageable males to go around. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a trivial thing. You can't have stable families, you can't have stable communities, stable anything where you have that kind of sex ratio imbalance, particularly if you want to marry what? At a comparable level to what you find. Y'all may not believe it. UNC system, 2014. UNC system, 220,000, the latest data I have, was 43% male. The predominantly white institutions were 45% male. The minority-serving historically black colleges were 36% male. The community colleges about 44% male. We had one school several years ago that was 80-20. 80% female, 20% male. Where are the men? Where are the boys? Connect the dots. Connect the dots. I think I know where they are. This is our human capital challenge here, ladies and gentlemen, and it exists at the intersection of the browning of America on the one hand and the graying of America on the other hand. And if you look at the data, kids under 18 population has declined because fertility rates are down. Where is that decline concentrated? In white population and the black population, but the decline has been offset almost totally by the growth in the other non-white groups in terms, so it's not a big decline, but it's concentrated among whites, the decline in black kids, but massive growth in these other places. There's something that I define as the triple whammy of geographic disadvantage that exists at the intersection of browning and graying. Those red counties on this map are racial generation gap counties. What does that mean? The adult voting age population in those counties are predominantly white, aging, empty nesters, but the school age population is predominantly non-white. What kind of support for public education you think you get there? That's the ain't got no dog in the K-12 education fight. My kids are out of school. I'm most concerned about what? Crime, safety, and retirement amenities, and they typically vote self-interest. The orange counties are majority-minority counties. The adult voting age population is predominantly non-white. School age population is predominantly non-white. Lots of interest in education. What's missing? Inadequate tax base to guarantee anybody a high-quality education. The gray counties, the majority of those counties up there are majority counties where the adult population is predominantly non-Hispanic white, the school-age population is predominantly non-Hispanic white. But about a fifth of the kids who go to school in those gray areas are kids of color. But if you peer beneath the veneer in those gray areas and ask what kinds of schools or where the kids of color are attending school, they're in one of two situations typically. They're either attending racially isolated schools in those districts, or in the quote-unquote good schools, they are underrepresented in what? The gifted and talented tracks, AP, honors, and IB. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, the new majority of kids of color, are between a rock and a hard place in our education system through no fault of their own, okay? That's whammy number one. And you can look at this on your own, but I've broken out the numbers across those categories for you. Whammy number two is at the neighborhood level, or census tract level. These are hyper segregation. Those red counties on this, or neighborhoods on this map, are predominantly non-Hispanic white. 60% or more of the population in those red areas are non-Hispanic white. In the gold areas, 60% or more of the population is non-white. And in the yellow areas, those neighborhoods are transitioning from white to non-white. Ladies and gentlemen, that's defined as hyper-segregation, separate and unequal, and arrivals of segregation of the year 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education, the year that I was born, okay? Whammy number 2. Those are the numbers across that. Y'all can look at them on your own. Whammy number 3, concentrated poverty and concentrated affluence. The red neighborhoods are extreme poverty. 40% or more of the kids who walk in the school door every day come from households with incomes below the poverty level. The orange, between 25 and about 39% of the kids come from households below the poverty level. We put those orange and red together. We call that concentrated poverty. In the yellow areas, the poverty rate is below 25%. We call that concentrated affluence. When you look at our school system, and those are the numbers across those categories, when you look at our school system today, public school system, we got kids who have all 3 of those things. They're in a school district or community where there's little political or financial support for their education, and they come from neighborhoods characterized by concentrated poverty and hyper-segregation. 14 million kids in our school system fit that bill. That population is 88% non-white. 2 of those things say hypersegregation and concentrated poverty. About 21 million kids, that population is 69% non-white. If you got 1 of those things, it's about 16 million kids, that's a 33% non-white. For about 23 million kids, life is good. They don't have to deal with any of that stuff, but that population is only 17% non-white. Where's your growth going to come from in the future? It's going to come from the top, not the bottom. Until we reframe these issues here as competitiveness issues in the marketplace, we're going to be in deep, deep trouble moving forward. I wish it ended there. Those are food deserts. You see the correlation between those kinds of things. Some of you know that we run a charter school in Durham, North Carolina. Durham is all that in a bag of chips plus dip in terms of migration and the like. I'll show it to you in just a minute. And one day, at the end of the school day, I was at the school waiting for parents to pick up their kids, and unfortunately, I had a conversation with 3 little girls, and I made the mistake of asking one little girl, I said, "What did you have for dinner last night?" And she looked at me and she said, "Last night was not my turn to eat." She said, "In our household, we rotate who gets to eat dinner, and I get to eat every 3rd night." Okay. Now, this is not rural hinterland. This is not some emerging market society. This is in one of the top booming migration destinations. We got kids who get to eat every 3rd night. I wish it ended there. Extreme suspensions. 3 million kids suspended and expelled from school annually, and 250,000 of them referred to the police for misdemeanor charges as early as the 1st grade. Those are the black kids. Those are the Latino kids. Shouldn't be magical that we don't know where those boys are. Shouldn't be magical. And this is it. We looked at these data of some schools several years ago. Who was in the classroom to take the end of course tests? Blue-line boys, red-line girls. You see a slight sex ratio imbalance. Where are the boys? Where are the boys? Well, some of them could be suspended, expelled. But I must confess to you, I had a group of school leaders I spoke to one day. They were very honest. They said there are some school leaders who tell their boys, "Don't come to school the day of the test, because I can't have you screwing up my what? In the course results." That's what you get for the high school graduates. This is an enrollment projection study we did for a high school system that remained nameless. They produce 6,000 graduates a year. About 1,500 of them go to the community college. The blue line is a percentage of kids that are college ready to take every class. The red line needs 1 remedial course. The green line needs 2 or more remedial courses. These are the ones that graduate. I'm not talking about the ones who drop out or get pushed out well before that happens. Can't be competitive that way, folks. And then this is the thing that really, I think, is the next big challenge for us that we as a nation and you as a school board need to think about, is this working poor challenge among civil servants, public school teachers, and others. We've been working on this problem, and this, I told you I was going to give you some IRS migration data. If you look at North Carolina, in that data file, they have, when you file your taxes, they figure out whether you're a migrant. If your address has changed since you filed your taxes last, they define you as a migrant. You're either moving into a place or you're leaving a place, and then there are people whose addresses are the same in 2 years. They're non-migrants. And in this file, they report your adjusted gross income and a number of exemptions, so I can get your per capita income. Basically, what this graphic shows is that if you look at people coming to North Carolina, they bring a migration dividend. Let's just look at the 55-plus population. So the average person, 55 or older, coming to North Carolina, 2015, 2016, per capita adjusted gross income was $59,000. The average person leaving had an adjusted gross income of $55,000, and the average person staying here 55 was $45,000. So there's a migration dividend of people coming in. They make more money than people leaving, and they make more money than people what? That are already here. That's a good thing for us. That's a good thing for us. And it's across all categories. And if you look at a place like Durham, it's an incredible, it is attracting people from all over the place. I mean, it is one of the hottest markets, places in the nation today. 143 people arriving in Durham daily, a net of 43 from New York every day coming into the place. But you need to understand and unpack where those people are coming from and how much money they're bringing with them. So the average migration dividend for Durham, North Carolina is about $11,000. That means the average person coming in has an adjusted gross income $11,000 higher than anybody that already lives there. But if you're coming from Manhattan, New York, you're bringing a migration dividend of $56,000 more than anybody who lives in the place. If you're coming from Cambridge, Massachusetts, it's $21,000. Yonkers, New York is $19,000. San Diego is about $31,000. Chicago is about $15,000. Herndon and Arlington, $21,000 and $14,000. It shouldn't be a surprise that there's nothing downtown Durham under what? $1 million a year to buy. And it shouldn't be a surprise that the rents are what? $2,500 to $3,000 per month. So I've been looking at this working poor population, people who work every day but don't earn enough money to have an above poverty level existence. If you look at the working poor in Durham, 30% of them got some college or an associate's degree, and 10% of them got a bachelor's degree or higher. What that says is 40% of the population who are working every day got some college, a bachelor's degree or higher. Somebody told me if you go to school, get an education, stay out of trouble with the law, life's supposed to be good. And here's the significance of it. The median household income is about $54,000. These are the folks over here to the left whose incomes are below the median. What do you think that means, ladies and gentlemen? It means that the people who are hired to protect public health and safety and to educate our kids can't afford to live in the very place that they're hired to do what? Protect public health and safety and teach our kids. I got wind of it. This is the school that we operate in Durham. The dark blue line, this is the whole staff, administrators and staff. The dark blue line is how much money you need to live in Durham to cover basic necessities, given your family composition, okay? The light blue line is how much we pay them, okay? You'll note a slight problem. I got wind of this because, ladies and gentlemen, last year at my school, I had 4 homeless teachers. Okay, 4. My 4th grade teacher, she got 4 kids of her own, master's degree, drop dead teacher, knock your socks off, homeless. Given her family composition, to cover basic necessities in Durham, she needs to make $97,000 a year. She makes about 50 some at the school, so she has a deficit of about $51,000. That's my IT guy. He has 3 kids, including a newborn. His deficit is $43,000. That's a teaching assistant. Her deficit is about $15,000. It's not working, folks. And I bust my tail trying to pay them every nickel. People ask me, how do I fundraise? I call it the shakedown. They say, what is it? I shake down everybody I run into to try to make them have a basic human existence. It shouldn't be surprising that the largest concentration of workers who are Uber drivers are what? Public school teachers. You don't want to get a call at midnight and one of your staff people with their 4 kids on the street got no place to live. You don't want to get that call. See, ladies and gentlemen, no matter, think about the ability of that person to have a sound lesson plan tomorrow morning. Got nothing to do with skill and everything to do with life. That's what we're up against. That's what we're up against. You can look at Mecklenburg. I put these in. Y'all can look at them on your own. On these destinations, lots of people coming into North Carolina, about $5,000 there in terms of migration dividend. That's Wake County. All of this, the same kind of stuff that is happening in Durham. It's about $4,400, $15,000 from Manhattan. A younger population going into Wake County than into Durham. So, ladies and gentlemen, we got to figure out how to manage this transition from the graying of America to the browning of America. And until we connect the dots between those two things, we're going to always have challenges in our education system. I get it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm 65 years old, and you come to me and you say, I want to raise your taxes to do what? Educate kids. And I say, yeah, please, I'm trying to get to Aruba. Okay, I get it. But ladies and gentlemen, your biggest challenge is to convince people like me that we do have a dog in the K-12 education fight. Okay? Let me try my convincing to you all. What I say to people like me is, sooner or later, you're going to age to the level that somebody needs to take care of your old butt. You do want them to be able to count your pills. I can show you people that can't count pills. I can show you people that can't count pills. By no means am I suggesting that we ignore the migration dividend. That's additional tax revenue, consumer expenditures, that's good. But we got to balance that with what? Understanding, what's happening in other people. I don't see, ladies and gentlemen, how we're going to compete, thrive, and prosper without embracing immigrants, and we got to deal with this wayward son problem. That sex ratio imbalance is unacceptable. We're leaving too many young boys behind, and it's going to come back to haunt us. I think we got to pursue more inclusive and equitable development that generates shared prosperity. We've just developed a roadmap for Durham to deal with these kinds of issues. It's called Built to Last. It's on their website if you want to see it. All of us got to be engaged in K-12 education to understand that this is a competitiveness issue. And that's just not the little black, brown, and brown kids that got a problem. We got a problem as a nation and as a state when it comes to this talent that we're leaving behind. And I think all of us need to become a champion of the iceberg model of diversity. I'm sure some of you have heard this and seen it. With an iceberg, you only see about 30% of it, which would be the equivalent of the physical aspects of diversity. I think it's pretty clear that I'm a black male standing here. I think that's pretty clear. If it isn't, I'll tell you at the end. But if that's all you know about me, my physical trace, if that's all you know, you're missing a lot of stuff. If that's all you know. There's no way probably anybody in the room that wouldn't know me or that doesn't know me would know that I lost 10 family members in the last decade, including a spouse at 48 years old. That's everything about me. But you wouldn't know that. How many people in your work environment that you just sized up not knowing what? Based on just what you see? Or how many kids that walk into the classroom every day, you size them up on based on what you see? Ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of other stuff. That's the key to competitiveness. That's the key to a world-class education. Because until you get beneath the visible, the visual, and understand the life course, and you know what I found? I've taught diversity classes in the business school for 20 years. What I found is when you go beneath and start looking at those invisible diversity traits, there are far more commonalities than there are differences. You just got to do the work to get there. And when you get there, it's not even hard to find, because when you connect with them like this, it's on then. It's scary in terms of their potential, their creativity, their power. But we have to think about it this way. I know it's time for me to go. Y'all can put me out of the room if you want to. I'm going home anyway. So, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Did I do what you want me to do?
Exactly.
If I didn't, I'm still going home. Is it?
Dr. Johnson, you got this one on? See, it's working about as good for me.
Right there.
There we go. Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for speaking the truth to us, a reality that we cannot ignore, we must embrace, and must figure out how to change in order to benefit from the changes that are coming through our state and our society. Tell you what, let's take about a 10-minute break. I know many of you probably want to ask Dr. Johnson questions. We may even send you some after this. But let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll reconvene in about 1:50. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Reggie Keenan, a graduate of North Carolina A&T, Guilford College, number 22 on the football team.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, I'm Reginald Keenan, the chair of this committee along with Mr. Guilford. Happy today to have some great speakers to educate us on nutrition. And my presentation, as Dr. Harvey.
We appreciate the opportunity to join you this afternoon, although I seem to resonate. Not sure why that is. Thank you very much. Thank you. On behalf of the School Nutrition Section, it is a great privilege to join you this afternoon to talk about our favorite subject. And I couldn't thank Dr. Johnson more for teeing up this conversation, as he did so nicely, to point out the needs of so many who are under-reflected in our school nutrition program. We've adopted as our philosophy in the division, we think nutrition because students cannot think without it. That's been our mantra for many, many years. And I want to recall a conversation at the August board meeting that brought us to this place today. As you may revisit the presentation made by the Whole Child Committee, suggesting that we can do more to address the needs of the whole child. And certainly among those needs was to ensure that children are adequately nourished as part of the instructional day. That conversation led to additional dialogue about what we're doing in the school nutrition environment, have been doing for quite some time to expand students' access to school meals, and has culminated in the conversation today. I'm happy to be a part of a panel to address from various perspectives the needs of students relative to healthy school meals. Just for those of you who may be new to the conversation of school meals and the role of the Department of Public Instruction in administering those meals, we administer the programs you see here. Many of you are familiar with them, having participated in them yourselves. School meal programs go back to 1946. We have quite a legacy of supporting not only education, but supporting the health of students and families, supporting the economic base in many of our rural and metropolitan communities, and certainly supporting homeland security. The roots of the school nutrition programs come in the protection of our country as we look at the post-World War II era. These programs have continued to sustain themselves and are now considered for many students critical safety nets. I'll call your attention to two of the items that you may not be familiar with. In administering the federally assisted, I choose that word as opposed to federally funded, but federally assisted school nutrition programs, we also provide technical assistance training and professional development to school nutrition professionals across the state. We provide roughly 120, thank you. We provide roughly 120 days of professional development to school nutrition professionals, both in their districts and in areas. We also, as part of that academy, offer the K-12 Culinary Institute for school nutrition managers at the school level to help them develop the culinary skills required to produce the most exciting, appealing, and nutritious meals for students. Now, the why we do what we do. What we do is simply based on the science, to begin with, of nutrition. We know that by having adequate nutrients, we support brain growth and development. Those nutrients also create a relationship in the brain where nutrients in food provide the source of neurotransmitters. Those neurotransmitters fire off into the sequence, and as a result, students are able to think. They are able to assume those higher level operating skills, the critical thinking skills, the synthesis, the discernment, the judgment, those Bloom's taxonomy, higher level achievements. The absence of those essential nutrients impairs a student's ability to learn for many reasons. Not only are the neurotransmitters not firing to prepare students to think critically, but there's also a concern that there's not sufficient energy to support students' metabolic rate so as to keep them metabolically active, keep their brains alert, their bodies alert. So non-nutritious food and an unhealthy diet is actually counterproductive to our goals. That's why you've seen a tremendous change in the content of school meals over the past decade. Our goal is to make certain that it's not just feeding children, but it's offering nourishment, highly nutritious meals to students. Now, that's a change for many students. They're not accustomed to some of the healthful fare they're provided now in public schools, and you may be hearing some of that pushback. But we continue to pursue to make certain that we're providing, again, the most nutritious meals for students. At the end of the day, we believe that our work is about nourishing students' bodies, minds, and souls. And I think if you've been in a school nutrition dining room lately, you've seen the warm embrace that school nutrition professionals provide to children every day as they see them get